When you look at the world, it's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed by these huge, messy problems. And when things feel that chaotic, our brains, they just crave a simple story, right? A clear villain, a secret plot. But what if the most powerful explanation isn't about some shadowy they at all? What if, and stick with me here, what if it's really about us?
So let's just dive right in. Why this constant hunt for a secret plan? Honestly, it's a deeply human thing to do. The moment we feel like we're losing control, when events feel random and just plain scary, we instinctively try to find a pattern, some hidden hand that's pulling all the strings. It's our way of trying to make sense of a world that feels dangerously out of control. This quote from sociopsychologist Pia Lamberty, it just hits the nail on the head. This is the core psychological driver. It's that feeling of powerlessness that sends us digging for a story. It's not really about the evidence. It's about our emotional and, our cognitive needs. We're just trying to find an explanation that makes us feel like we get it, that someone, somewhere, is in charge, even if they're the bad guys.
And our brains? Oh, they are more than happy to help us out. We are pattern recognition machines, literally. But that superpower can lead us way off track. The cognitive psychologist Thomas Gilovich calls confirmation bias the mother of all biases. And it's basically this. It's our tendency to see what we already believe. We pick out the dots that support our theory, and we just ignore the ones that don't, creating a story that feels totally coherent but is actually built on some pretty shaky ground. Okay, so this brings us to the central idea of this whole explainer, something I'm calling the great causal inversion. It's this idea that so many of these grand narratives don't just get the facts wrong, they get the entire cause and effect relationship completely, 100% backward. The philosopher Karl Popper just illustrates this perfectly. He argued that conspiracy theories are basically a modern, secular kind of religion. Think about it. In ancient times, people said floods and famines were caused by angry gods. Well, Popper says, today we've just swapped out those gods for powerful hidden groups of people. We need a simple, intentional cause for these huge, complex events. And here's how that causal inversion really works in practice. We see these massive, complex systems at the top, technology, global economics, all that stuff. And we assume they were designed from the top down, with the intent to control. But the reality? It flows from the bottom up. The baseline, the absolute foundation of all civilization, has always been the simple act of manipulating resources to survive. So, the crucial point is this. Human beings have always coordinated, extracted, and divvied up resources. It's how we build societies. The incredibly complex systems we see today weren't just invented out of thin air to control us. They are simply scaled up, souped-up tools built to extend that fundamental, pre-existing human drive. We're mistaking the tool for the original intent. So, if a secret cabal with a master plan isn't the main reason for the world's problems, then what is? Well, that forces us to take a hard look at the raw material we're using to build our societies. And that raw material, well, it's us. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes had a pretty clear-eyed view of all this. He basically argued that our fundamental human drivers, competition for stuff, fear of other people, and wanting a good reputation, mean that dynamics of domination and control just emerge naturally. They aren't some external force corrupting an otherwise pure system. They spring directly from our own nature. This is one of my favorite metaphors from Immanuel Kant. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. Wow. What he means is that any system, any institution, any organization built by us, by human beings, will inherently have our flaws baked right in. Our biases, our crookedness. You can't get a perfect outcome because the builders themselves are imperfect. And you know what? Modern psychology totally backs this up. We are just riddled with cognitive biases and limitations. We favor our own group. We make excuses for our own mistakes. We're way too easily swayed by authority. We blow threats out of proportion, and a lot of the time, we just fail to think critically. And these aren't the flaws of a few bad apples. This is the standard operating system for the human mind. These are the bricks we're using to build our world. So how do these little individual flaws lead to such large-scale harm? It's really crucial to understand that just because these outcomes are predictable, just because they emerge from our own nature, it does not make them harmless. Foundational does not mean benign. Not at all. See, the problem is our modern world acts like a massive amplifier. When you take these small individual human flaws and you scale them up through global systems, that's when things get really dangerous. This is the terrifying math of it all. Scaling our own imperfection has severe, real-world consequences. Small errors, when they're multiplied by millions of people and amplified by incredibly powerful technology, create massive, systemic harm. And the results is this. These things on the screen, they are not the agenda items of some secret committee meeting. They are the predictable, emergent outcomes of building large-scale systems with crooked timber. Take environmental degradation. It's almost never caused by a single villain gleefully pouring sludge into a river. It's the result of millions of rational, self-interested decisions. Us buying the cheapest product, a company maximizing its quarterly profits, all amplified by a global supply chain that just wasn't designed with ecological balance in mind.
So where does all this leave us? Well, it actually offers a more powerful, a more honest way to understand and critique the world. One that lets us move beyond that simple choice between paranoia on one side and just being naive on the other. It lets us be critical without having to invent a whole mythology.
The key, really, is to shift our whole frame of reference. The conspiracy frame is always looking for hidden agents and secret malice. It's focused on finding someone to blame, and its goal is really just a satisfying story. But the structural frame, it looks at emergent outcomes driven by our scaled-up imperfections, and it demands real analytical rigor. So instead of asking, who is to blame, it asks a much, much more powerful question. How does this system actually work? Because when you ask that, you start to see the real levers of change, the incentives, the feedback loops, the friction points that actually produce these harms. And that is way more useful than just looking for a villain. The political theorist Hannah Arendt made this chillingly relevant point. She argued that the greatest harms in history often don't come from these monstrous, evil geniuses, but from ordinary people who simply failed to think, who failed to question their own role within a destructive system. It's thoughtlessness, not necessarily malice, that can wreak the most havoc. And that leaves us with one final question. What happens when we stop wasting all our energy hunting for monsters in the shadows and we start directing our focus to the architecture of the machine itself? A machine, by the way, that we all have a hand in building and maintaining. When we do that, we move from satisfying stories to effective analysis. And that is where the real power to create change actually begins.